Okay, Boker Tov. So we are carrying on. We got up to the 2 dots yesterday. We are on Daf Tet Amud Bet, Masechet Beitzah, the 2 dots about the bottom third of the page. This is one of those places where the Gemara brings a quote from the Mishnah. It's not clear how it's related to this particular line in the Mishnah. It says, "Avamateo mechalon lachalon." Just to remind ourselves, we're dealing with the machloket that we saw between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel regarding going up to get these birds on Yom Tov, right? We're talking about these shovach, the staff coats, whereby are you allowed to carry the ladder from one to another to go up and to get the the bird on Yom Tov? The issue would be that obviously going up and getting the bird and taking it to shechted would not be a prohibition. That's part of ochal nefesh, and that's allowed. But the question is, maybe there's a bit of extra tircha, or maybe there's an issue of marit ayin, as we've discussed, in terms of moving this ladder around. Beit Shammai is more reticent about moving the ladder because they're worried people will see you carrying this ladder and they'll say, that's not, he's going to fix his roof. Whereas Beit Hillel say, no, you can see shavchol machiach alav. You can see what the ladder is. You can see what it's for. We spoke yesterday. We saw the Beitzah and we saw different opinions. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa. We saw the story of the Masechet with Bnei Rabbi Chia, talking about where you had a sulam, which was not of a shovach, but it was a sulam shel aliyah. If it was it's not a specific ladder. Moshe told us yesterday the explanation from Steinsaltz about what the different types of ladders look like. Moshe, maybe you can show us. Have you got the pictures there? Can't really see anything.
He's muted, so he can't turn it the other way around. Have him turn it straight.
Yeah. Moshe, turn it. If you can rotate the book, we can see it better. Okay, Beseda, we'll make do with that. In any event, those are the different types of ladders. You can see that an ordinary ladder, sulam shel aliyah, there's going to be a big problem in carrying it around. People are going to think, even according to Beit Hillel, people are going to think he's going to do fix up his roof on Yom Tov, whereas the sulam shel shovach, that would be okay. But in any event, what we see is that Beit Hillel, as we're used to, as we're accustomed to, Beit Hillel are more lenient. In other words, Beit Hillel are waiving the prohibition, so to speak, for the sake of Simchat Yom Tov. And what the Gemara now is going to address is the fact that we've already seen in an earlier Mishnah that it seems to be the other way around. It seems to be that Beit Shammai are actually the ones who are more lenient and more willing to waive a prohibition in terms of Simchat Yom Tov. We're going to see supposedly a contradiction and 5 different ways of looking at it. So the Gemara says, again, says now after the 2 dots, about a third of the way from the bottom, Alma gabei simchat Yom Tov, Beit Shammai lechumra, uBeit Hillel lekula. Okay, nothing, no chiddush there, and that's what we'd expect. Always, nearly always, we say that Beit Hillel go lekula in any event, and Beit Shammai go lechumra. But we're saying, regarding specifically simchat Yom Tov, regarding where you might have a prohibition, you might have an isur d'Rabbanan, in this case of marit ayin, and Beit Hillel say you don't have to worry about it for the sake of Simchat Yom Tov, it's allowed, and Beit Shammai say no. Says the Gemara, well, that is a contradiction. Ramini, Hashochet chayav ve'of beyom Tov, Beit Shammai omrim yachpor b'dekev v'yichaseh, uBeit Hillel omrim lo yishchot elam ken haya lo afar muchan mibod yom. So this was the previous Mishnah we saw. This was the first Mishnah of the Masechet. And you remember that Mishnah was what was common about all those cases was that it was from Chumrei Beit Hillel and Kula Beit Shammai. So we said over there that when it comes to shchita, we said in the Mishnah, shochet chaya ve'of b'yom tov. If you're going to slaughter an animal, chaya or a bird, on Yom Tov. So Beit Shammai said, yachpol b'dekev v'yichaseh. Again, the case was, you don't have any earth to cover up the blood. Beit Shammai said, you can go, you can do the shchita, you can dig it up, and you can cover up the blood. Beit Hillel omrim, this is when somebody comes limalech, somebody comes to ask, should they do it in the first place? Beit Hillel omrim, lo yishchot elam ken haya lo afar muchan mibod yom. Beit Hillel say, no, you should only do the shchita if you know that you have the dirt ready, right? We saw the Mishnah goes on to say that even Beit Hillel would agree that if you'd already done it, if you're already shechted, and then you come to ask, can you cover it up? So then you need to cover it up. But should you do it in the first place? Are we prepared to waive the potential Yisud Rabbanan that might be here in digging up the earth? Beit Shammai say yes, Beit Hillel say no. So in our Mishnah regarding the Shovach, regarding the dove coats, we see that Beit Hillel say we're not worried about the Yisur and we can go and do it because it's for Simchat Yom Tov. And Beit Shammai say no. In the previous Mishnah, when it comes to Shchita, can you go and do the Shchita even though you've got a problem of Kisoy Adam? Beit Shammai say yes, and Beit Hillel say no. So it's exactly opposite. Who is it? Is it Beit Shammai or is it Beit Hillel that's willing to waive the prohibition in order for Simchat Yom Tov? So that's the question. Let's read it again. Alma Gabei Simchat Yom Tov, Beit Shammai lechumra, Beit Hillel lekula, uramini השוחט חייב עוף ביום טוב, בית שמאי אומרים יחפור בדקה ויכסה, בית הלל אומרים לא ישחוט, אלא אם כן, היה לו עפר מוכן מבעוד יום. So now, אמר רבי יוחנן, מוחלפת השיטה. Says Rabbi Yochanan, yeah, you're right, there is a contradiction, and we have to switch it around. Mukhlefet hashita, meaning that which we said is Beit Shammai is actually Beit Hillel, and that which we said is Beit Hillel is actually Beit Shammai. Somehow, somewhere along the line, we got mixed up. We said the wrong opinion, but we have to switch them. We have to switch them around. Now, what the Gemara is going to do, again, it's going to go through 5 different examples of cases. Each one is going to say, this is where Rabbi Yochanan said, Mukhlefet hashita, that we have to switch around Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And then it's going to say, no, this is not a contradiction. You can explain it differently. And we're going to find a different place where we have Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, where we actually do say Mukhlefet hashita until we get to the right one. We're going to get through 5 of them. So let's see. So this is the first case. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mukhlefet hashita. Right, Rashi just says Mukhlefet hashita, but halfway down in Rashi, he says Kan uchlefa shitata, and yeah, we've got them mixed up. What we said is Beit Shammai is actually Beit Hillel and vice versa. V'tzorich lahafoch divreihem. You need to switch it around. So now it says the Gemara like this. It says, so Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mukhlefet hashita. It says Mimai. Right? If we can explain the Mishnayot in a way that they actually are consistent, we can find some way to distinguish between the cases and say that which we said is Beit Hillel is still Beit Hillel, and that which we said is Beit Shammai is still Beit Shammai, and there's no contradiction to what they said in another place. Obviously, we'd prefer to explain it that way. We're only going to say Mukhlefet hashita if we have no other choice. And that is why the Gemara is questioning here the fact that Rabbi Yochanan says Mukhlefet hashita for these 2 Mishnah. It says Mimai. Dilma, maybe you could explain like this. Ad kan lo ka'amri Beit Shammai hatam, ela hecha de'ika de'kena'ut. Aval hacha de'leika de'kena'ut. Lo. So you could say it as follows. What's the problem? We're saying over here, Beit Shammai are not allowing us to overcome the prohibition, the rabbinic prohibition of Marit Ayin with the ladder for the sake of Simchat Yom Tov. But over there, when it came to Shchita and digging up the earth, they were willing to overcome a prohibition. So who says? Maybe Ad kan lo ka'amri Beit Shammai, that which Beit Shammai allowed it over there, hatam ela hecha de'ika de'kena'ut. We saw this already in the Gemara. Maybe they were only referring to a case where you had de'kena'ut, we had the shovel in the ground already from before Yom Tov, and therefore there's not actually any prohibition that you're transgressing. Hecha de'leika de'kena'ut lo. So says Rashi, "Va'hecha de'ika de'kena'ut lo, de'ika tzad remez chafira lo shalu, va'afilu ba'afar tichoach." Meaning only where you had you had the shovel on the ground from beforehand, so that's why they would allow it. Afilu ba'afar tichoach shu kechafur ve'omed. Even if we're talking about soft earth, right? You had to have prepared it from beforehand. So here there's no difference. Here the only issue is regarding Marit Ayin, the Chashad, and the Chashad still applies. So maybe we say that which Beit Shammai allowed over there is only in a case where there really is no prohibition. You're not actually doing anything wrong, and that's why they allowed it. But where there is a problem, like here there's a problem of Marit Ayin, they would not allow you to they would not allow you to carry the ladder, and therefore there is no contradiction in Beit Shammai. That's one way of explaining, that Beit Shammai in the previous case is not actually as makel as we thought they were. Or, continues the Gemara, Inami, ad kan lo kamri Beit Hillel alacha, ele teshofcho mechir chalav, avaratam lo. Or alternatively, we could say, no, the point is that Beit Hillel are not as makel here as we thought they were. Beit Hillel are not, what was our issue with carrying the ladder of Marit Ayin? Beit Hillel said there's no problem of Marit Ayin in the first place. You're only dealing with the Sulam of a Shovach, and everybody knows what that looks like. And therefore, if there was an issue of Marit Ayin, maybe they wouldn't say you could, just like in the Mishnah over there. Okay, so that is the way that this Mishnah can be explained. We aren't forced to say Mukhlefta Shita, but Rabbi Yochanan still said Mukhlefta Shita. So what did he say it about? So says the Gemara. Now we're going on to the first of the wide lines at the bottom of the page. He says, Ela ikasha hakasha. This is what the difficulty is. This is where you have a contradiction, and you have to say Mukhlefta Shita because there's no other way to resolve it. Beit Shammai, and this is going to be from forthcoming Mishnayot in our parak. So this is from the next Mishnah, which we haven't seen yet, but we'll get to it shortly. It says, Ela ikasha hakasha. Beit Shammai omrim lo yitol elam ken yenea mibod yom. Ubeit Hillel omrim omed veomer zeh v'zeh ani noter. Okay, so we're staying with the theme of these birds, which you want to have for your Yom Tov meal. So this, our Mishnah so far has discussed the moving the ladder to get up. But now you get up, and the question is, which bird are you allowed to take? If the birds are just there for their, and they're just going to stay there over Yom Tov, so they would be muktzah. They would be muktzah unless we designated it from before Yom Tov. You remember that right at the beginning of the Masechet Beitzah, we spoke about, is it a tarnagolet ha'omedet le'achila or tarnagolet ha'omedet le'gadel beitzim? And the difference between that would be whether it's muktzah or not. So over here too, you have these birds, and only the bird which you have designated for use, which is a bird which is omedet le'achila, you've designated it for use on Yom Tov, that's the one that you can pick up and you can shech, otherwise it would be muktzah. So the question is, what do you need to do in order to designate the birds from before Yom Tov? So Beit Shammai said, right, Lo yitol elam ken yanami bod yom. You have to go and you have to lift it up. You have to go and do an action. You have to pick up the bird already on Erev Yom Tov. Beit Shammai is worried that if you don't go and you don't pick it up, you just thought about it or you just spoke about it, on Yom Tov you're going to get up, you're going to see this bird and you're going to look at it and you're going to, for whatever reason, decide, well, maybe I don't actually want to shecht it, maybe I like this bird, well, or whatever it is. But you have to go and you have to, otherwise it's still muktzah. We're worried that you're going to go pick it up, you're going to change your mind, you're not going to shecht it, and then you just picked it up for nothing. So Beit Shammai omrim lo yito elam ken ni'aneh mibod yom. Says Rashi, elam ken ni'aneh mibod yom v'lo sagi b'chana b'dibur ba'alma. We've learned already before, you need hachana. There's that word again, hachana derabba, maybe that it needs to be prepared from before Yom Tov, but the hachana cannot just be in speech, can't just be talking about it. As the Gemara will explain later on, maybe then when you come and you pick it up, you're going to have mercy on it, you're going to change your mind, you're not going to want to shech this bird. So that is Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel says, no, it's enough to go and it's enough to say by speech. You're looking up at the birds, you say this one and this one, I want this one for lunch, I want this one for dinner, whatever it is. But that is enough, that satisfies the requirement of hachana. So what do we see here? We see, again, that Beit Hillel are much more lenient. We're dealing with a case of Simchat Yom Tov, and Beit Hillel are saying, we're willing to waive the prohibition of muktzeh just by the fact of speech. You don't have to physically go and designate and pick up the birds. That contradicts the previous Mishnah where Beit Shammai were the ones who are more lenient about digging up the earth in order to cover the blood. So Alma Gabei Simchat Yom Tov, Beit Shammai lechumra, or Beit Hillel lekula. So again, the Gemara is going to now spell it out for us. So based on that Mishnah, we see that Beit Shammai are more machmer and Beit Hillel are more maker when it comes to Simchat Yom Tov, regarding whether you have to go and pick up the birds in order to designate them or not. V'ramini, and that contradicts shochet chaya ve'of b'Yom Tov. Our first Mishnah in the Masechet. So yeah, says the Gemara now, Rabbi Yochanan Mukhlefta Shita. Same answer, right? You have to switch around the opinions of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So seemingly, every time when he says switch it around, we're talking about the later Mishnah. Seemingly, we wouldn't switch around in the first Mishnah. Also makes sense to say, well, there is a bit of disagreement amongst the Rishonim on this point, but it makes sense to say now, first Mishnah again is talking about the kulot of Beit Shammai and the chumrot of Beit Hillel, so that must be that those are in the right order, but it's the other one which needs to be switched. So again, says the Gemara, not so certain, not so sure. Dilma lohi, v'dilma lohi. Ad kan lo amli Beit Shammai. This is the same answer, right? Maybe again you'll say that Beit Shammai in the first Mishnah only lenient because you already had a dekanaot, and therefore they're not actually waiving any prohibition. They would say no. Or alternatively, we can look at it the other way. We're now on the top of that view, the Amud Alef, top of the page. Right? We could say, why over here are Beit Hillel so lenient, and Beit Hillel say you don't have to go and lift up the birds themselves, because we're only dealing with muktzah. And therefore it's going to be enough. That's the machloket. It's enough to just stand and designate it verbally that takes away the issue of muktzah, but I'm not actually going and performing any malacha, I'm not performing any prohibited action, and therefore avahatam lo. It's not the same as in the case of digging up the earth. So that is number two, where we say potentially mukhlef tashita, and the Gemara rejects, says no need to say that. So case number three, alei kasha hai kasha. We're now 4 lines from the top of the Yud Amud Alef. Alei kasha hai kasha. Maybe the case is this, going on to another later mission. Beit Shammai omrim einot linata eli lekatsev alav basar ubeit hillel matilin. So yeah, the case is we have this eli, which is a wooden board which they would use to cut on. So Rashi tells us over here, eta eli daf av v'kaved is this thick and heavy board, v'kotshin bo chitim, that's used to crush and to grind up wheat. And therefore, it's going to be considered a kli shemelachto le'isur. The question is, what happens if you want to use this eli in order to cut meat on it? So again, it's a kli shemelachto le'isur, but you're using it for a permitted purpose. Rashi continues, says, Kasavri Beit Shammai asur l'taltalo va'afilu l'tzorech gufo. Says Beit Shammai holds that in this case it's going to be forbidden to carry it, even l'tzorech gufo, for the sake of the object itself, not for its forbidden melacha. Shetzarech legufa kli lemelacha muteret hayom. That you need the actual kli itself for something which is allowed today. Okay, so we'll see in a moment exactly what the machloket is. It's interesting. I think I mentioned the other day that there's some of these words we have which we think of as one thing, but they're actually something else. So he has the example, muktzah. The word muktzah means something that is set aside. The main forms of muktzah, maybe the most familiar form of muktzah is a kli shemelachto le'isur. That's an object which is a kli, but its usual use is for something which is forbidden on Shabbat or Yom Tov. That is the most lenient form of muktzah. It might not even be correct to call that muktzah. We do. But generally speaking, muktzah is something that's set aside, so something that doesn't have a Torah kli on it. Something that doesn't have any use at all, or muktzah mechamat cheshron kis, for example, something which is a very, very valuable object, which you wouldn't just carry around. You wouldn't just let people touch it because it's so valuable. That is going to be muktzah mechamat cheshron kis. Those categories of muktzah are much more stringent, as we know, than a kli shemelachto le'isur. Kli shemelachto le'isur, you aren't allowed to move it. However, you are allowed to move it, what's called l'tzorech gufo, u'letzorech makomo. If you need to use the actual object, or you need to use the you need to make space where it is. If it's only a kli shemelachto le'isur, you can move it for that. So here with this eli, right? So because it's this board, it's used for crushing the wheat, which is going to be forbidden, and to be forbidden on Shabbat and on Yom Tov as well. But if you want to use it to kufo, you want to use it to chop the meat. So again, Beit Shammai said, "Einot lineta eli lekatsev alav basar." Beit Shammai said you can't carry it for that purpose. Ubeit Hillel matirin. However, Beit Hillel allow it. So essentially, what do we see from this? what comes out of it. Alma gabei simchat yom tov. Again, when it comes to simchat yom tov, because you're talking about the kli that you're going to use to chop up your meal. Beit Shammai lechumra, uBeit Hillel lekula. Beit Shammai are the ones that are being more stringent, and Beit Hillel are the ones that are being more lenient. Ulamini, and then we have a contradiction. Should start sounding familiar by now. Shochet chayav off, Beit Shammai v'chula, etc. From that first Mishnah. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan muchlefet hashita, and again says the Gemara maybe not. Mimai dilma loi ad kan lo kamri Beit Shammai hata melaecha deikadek nautz. Okay, again, it's the same explanation regarding Beit Shammai in the first Mishnah. Inami, however, alternatively, we could say like this. Now, the end of the short lines. Ad kan lo kamri Beit Hillelacha ela deika torat kli alav. Avahatam lo. We say no. Our case with this Eli, with this board, that is not a proof, because for Beit Hillel they might only be lenient here because the ikatrat kli alav. This is essentially what I was saying before. The kli shemelachto le'isor is not completely muktzeh. Muktzeh is something that has no use. That's not it's not a tool. It's not a kli that you can use. But this already is a kli. So since it's already a kli, in other words, since it's already a very lenient form of muktzeh, of kli shemelachto le'isor, therefore it's much easier for us to be lenient over here. Says Rashi, tarat kli alav. Even though it's melachto le'isur, nonetheless we know l'tzorech gufo, even if it wasn't simchat yom tov, you'd be allowed to carry it. So again, there's no real prohibition, so to speak, that Beit Hillel are waiving, and therefore there's no contradiction. Okay, so question number 4, attempt number 4, I should say. We're now in the halfway through the first of the wide lines. Says the Gemara, Ela ikasha. Hi kasha. This is the question you need to ask. This is the contradiction. Beit Shammai omrim, ein nonin et ha'ol lifnei hadolsan, v'lo yagbieno, ela im ken yesh alav kazayit basar. Ubeit Hillel matilin. Okay, so here again, this halacha probably a bit also not so familiar to us nowadays. But when you have these skins of the skins that are taken off the animals. So it says, you can't put it in a place where people are going to walk on it. Okay, when people are that's going to contribute towards the processing, the tanning of the skins. Right? It says Rashi. He says lifnei adolsan. Or just before that, okay, we're dealing with an animal that was killed on Yom Tov, and you've skinned it there. It says lifnei adolsan, don't put it down in a place where people are going to be walking and stepping on it. That is part of how part of how you prepare these skins. That's going to be the melacha. Now, Beit Hillel matilin, Beit Hillel are going to allow it, says Rashi, kasal gadatach. Again, at this point, we think why? Mishum simchat yom tov, because it's part of simchat yom tov. Why? Because if I need to perform the shechita on simchat yom tov, and then I don't want the skins to, I don't want to lose it, if you aren't going to allow people, this is Ahavamina, that if you aren't going to allow people to perform it, to sort of preserve and prepare the skins, then they're going to lose out on that, and then they aren't going to perform shechita on Yom Tov. Right? This is related to this halachic principle, which I think we've discussed before as well, of hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan, or tchilatan mishum sofan, right? Where you allow something in order that people shouldn't be prevented from performing it, even though it's not a direct need of Yom Tov. But that's the assumption at this point, that's the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Again, the Gemara said, Beit Shammai, I'm quoting the Mishnah, Beit Shammai omrim, eino ninet ha'ol lifnei hadolsan, v'lo yagbieno, you also can't lift it up. You can't carry it. Muktzeh. Ela im ken yesh alav kazayit basar. So say Beit Shammai, if it's still got a kazayit basar, if you've taken all the flesh off and it's just the skin, well, the skin you can't eat, and there's no use for it on Yom Tov as well. So therefore, going to be muktzah. If it's still got a kazait basar, still has a significant portion of meat attached to it, well, then it's going to be mutar according to everybody, because then I say that the skin is going to be batel to the flesh, and the flesh is the meat which you can use and you can carry obviously on Yom Tov. And Beit Hillel matirin, Beit Hillel allowed this. So therefore, what do we see? Alma gabei simchat Yom Tov. Beit Shammai lechumra, Beit Hillel lekula. Again, when it comes to allowing these things and being more lenient regarding these prohibitions, Beit Shammai are stringent and Beit Hillel are lenient because of Simchat Yom Tov. V'ramini hashochet chayav of b'Yom Tov v'chulei. Once again, that is the opposite of what we saw in our first Mishnah, where Beit Shammai were the ones who were more lenient about. So Rabbi Yochanan muchlefet hashita for the fourth time. He only said it once, but this is the fourth attempt to understand where he said it. Rabbi Yochanan muchlefet hashita. So mimai again says the Gemara, no. Dilma lo yad kan lo kamri Beit Shammai hatam ela echad deikadeh kenaot. Again, in the we're going to have to see when we finally resolve it why we don't say this. But maybe Beit Shammai again were not so lenient regarding Simchat Yom Tov. They only allowed it because you already had a dekanaot, and if you didn't, they would not. Inami, alternatively, Ad kan lo ka'amri Beit Hillel alacha ela dechazi lemazgai lavei. That Beit Hillel were not with these animal skins on the floor. It's not that Beit Hillel was so lenient. It's rather only here it's different. Yeah, it's because it is the chazi lemizgai lavei that you could lean on it, that you could sit on this on the skin. I guess somewhat like a carpet. That it's you could use it for that use anyway, and therefore you don't have the issue of the issue of muktzah that we thought we did. Says Rashi, lemizgai lavei. This is how they would. This is where they would sit. Shotchin begadim al gabei hakarka v'nismachin v'yoshvin al birkeihen kfufin kedamrin b'psachim. Okay, he explains exactly how they would put clothes and things on the floor, and they would lean on them, and they would sit on them. I guess they didn't have couches like we do, and therefore this animal skin. So you could. It's not that Beit Hillel is allowing it because of Simchat Yom Tov, but it's that Beit Hillel is allowing it because he thinks that it's not actually muktzah in the first place. And therefore there's no issue there. So says the Gemara, okay, so let's try again. If we're going to say there is a contradiction, it's from the following case, different one. Again, another machloket, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel relating to Yom Tov. Beit Shammai amrim ein mesalkin et hatrisin b'Yom Tov, uBeit Hillel matilin af lachzir. Okay, so these are, I don't know, again, maybe Moshe's got some pictures to show us here too. But these are these trisin, that there were these shops that they had, and these sort of metal doors that they had, which they would use to open and close the shops. The point is that these are not connected to the ground. These are somewhat portable. And there's going to be a question here regarding binyan and stira. When you put them up, or you close them, are you building or deconstructing on Yom Tov? So regarding these trisin of these shops, Beit Shammai amrim ein mesalkin et trisin b'Yom Tov. Beit Shammai say no, you can't move them, you can't take them away. Beit Hillel matirin af lachzir, and Beit Hillel say you can. So again, this is you're gonna have your shops open, where you're gonna have your foods and all sorts of things. So says the Gemara, Alma gabei simchat Yom Tov, Beit Shammai lechumra, Beit Hillel lekula. Again, Beit Shammai are the ones that are stringent, and Beit Hillel are the ones that are lenient. The same kasha that we've had already. So answer the Gemara like this. Says Bishlema Beit Shammai lo kasha. You see it's a slightly different the way that the Gemara now gives the answer. It says regarding Beit Shammai there's no kasha. Hatam the ika deka naotz. Again, the same resolution we say for Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel kasha. But regarding Beit Hillel, there's a difficulty because over here he's more lenient and over there he was more stringent. So Rabbi Yochanan muchlefet hashita. Ad kan lo kamri Beit Hillel hacha ela mishum de'en binyan bekelim ve'en stira bekelim avahatam lo. So once again, we say no. The difference between Beit Hillel in this Mishnah and in the previous one is that again, Beit Hillel is not allowing is not waiving a prohibition. He just simply says we don't say binyan b'kelim or stira b'kelim. These trisim are not connected to the ground, and therefore it's not considered really the melacha of binyan and stira. Okay, it's a big sugya regarding binyan and stira b'kelim and how it applies, many practical applications of it. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more in the next year.
There are good reason as to why the Dorsan wants to get rid of the hides and the skins. And the reason for that is, in fact, it was a very popular Jewish trade years ago to sell these skins and so forth, but it has a tremendous odor. And to have that odor in Yontef in your house, you want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
You leave a piece of meat on it and tell them, hey, take it.
Definitely. Okay. Thankfully, we don't have that problem nowadays.
No.
So, thank you very much.
All right.
Have a good day, everybody.
Well, wonderful day,
Shalom,
everybody.
everyone.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Thanks.
Shalom Vorach.